to Studio JW. I'm Sandee Brawarsky. Really pleased to be here with Dara Horn. Dara's a great novelist. We're going to be talking about her fourth book, which is called A Guide for the Perplexed. Dara's been writing probably for her whole life. I think she published her first novel when she was 25, but even before that had stories in national magazines when she was about 14. She's won 2 National Jewish Book Awards and also was named by Granta one of the best young American novelists. This book is about so many things. It's about history, it's about technology, it's about family, memory, and it's a great mystery, but it's a really serious book about ideas. I just wonder if it's possible if you could just give a really short description of the plot, but without giving much away.
Sure. Well, Guide for the Perplexed is the story of a woman who creates a software app that records everything its users do and catalogs it all according to their instincts. When I wrote this a year ago, this was fiction. Now it's, Google Glass, the NSA. Okay. She has a sister who works with her who's very, very jealous of her. And when she's invited to be a consultant for 3 weeks to a library in Egypt, she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to leave her husband and child behind, even for this short time. But her sister, who wants her out of her hair, encourages her to go. She goes. While she's there, she's kidnapped, and things spiral down from there. And I should say that this contemporary plot is based on the Joseph story from the Torah, but retold in contemporary times with women instead of men. So there's also a historical plot, which is about the discovery of the Cairo Geniza, which was this vast trove of medieval manuscripts that were found in a 1,000-year-old synagogue in Cairo. And the two plots intertwine in this exploration of data storage then and now, what we save and why we save it.
Just my story in the paper this week actually happens to be about the Cairo Geniza and a new exhibit at the Yeshiva University Museum. So there's your book. There have been 2 other recent books about the Geniza. How do you explain that kind of cultural moment? But also, how did you get interested in particular in the subject?
The Geniza, of course, is when you have texts with God's name that can't be discarded. They are placed in a storage room prior to burial. In the medieval community in Cairo, the custom was to store everything that was written in Hebrew letters. So it wasn't just prayer books, it was things like grocery lists that really reveal a whole life of the community. To me, this was the medieval Facebook. This is this sort of ongoing public record of really mundane junk in a lot of ways, and which really a lot of its value only comes from the aggregate nature, that it's everyone in a community really contributing something, and that way sort of creating a virtual reconstruction of their world. Now, of course, I think we live in a constant reconstruction of our world. It's ongoing all the time. The way that social media has reshaped memory, has reshaped personal identity in recent years, is something that I've thought a lot about, and probably almost everyone has thought a lot about, as we sort of create personas for ourselves online, or find that everything that we do is recorded. It changes the nature of the way you remember things when you're able to offload your memory into some kind of storage. And what I was interested in finding was how that process has changed historically till now, and also the elements of it that remain the same.
So you talk a lot about memory, what's worth remembering, and also the notion that we can't remember everything. Right? So does a Geniza help us remember, or do you really need some sort of filtering device?
I think that the Geniza is supposed to be this sort of unfiltered memory. And in a lot of ways, what we see on the internet is also this kind of unfiltered memory. It's sort of this ongoing archive. Of course, people do create these personas for themselves, but there is sort of this material that's recorded that never would have been recorded. What interests me is the difference between memory and history. There's a famous book by Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, the great Jewish historian, called Zachor, Remember, which is about Jewish collective memory. And he talks in that book about the distinction between memory and history. And he says that until the 19th century, Jews did not even slightly care about history, which to me sounds like, is there something else that we care about? Because I thought that Jews are so enmeshed in the past. And what he's saying, though, is yes, Jews are enmeshed in the past, but not through history, but through memory. The distinction being that history is this attempt at recording everything that's happened, whereas memory is the attempt of taking past events and turning them into a story. And that requires a selection.
Just on the quality of the sentences, you write so beautifully. I wonder, maybe just read the first paragraph.
Sure.
That would be great.
What happens to days that disappear? The light fades, the gates begin to close, and all that a day once held, a glance, a fight, a taste of bread, a handful of braided hair, thousands of worries and triumphs and regrets, all of it slips between those closing gates, vanishing into a dark and silent room. When Josephine Ashkenazi first invented Geniza, all she wanted to do was open those gates.
Thanks. It's really beautiful. You once told me that you would like to turn English into a Jewish language.
Yes.
I wonder what you really meant, and do you feel like that's something that you're doing in this book?
I do. I mean, I think even in that passage that I just read, the passage I just read, which is the very first paragraph of the book, it has many, many allusions in it to the Jewish liturgy. I mean, there's references to the Ne'ilah service, the idea of the closing of the gates, to the dark and silent room. This is references to the Geniza. So these are, and there's in the wording that I use. I have a doctorate in Hebrew and Yiddish literature, and when I was studying those works, I felt very jealous of those writers, because these were people who were writing secular work, but it was stories that were, the language in the story was sort of constantly referring to texts from the Jewish religious tradition. Even if they were writing something that was anti-religious, it was something that was just built into the language. It was almost unavoidable. And I think that a lot of the sense of inauthenticity that we often have in the American Jewish community comes from the loss of the Jewish language. This is a very unusual Jewish community in world history, in that it's a community that doesn't primarily use and not just Hebrew, but use a Jewish language. It's a community that uses English. So one of the things I've tried to do in all my novels, including this one, is to write in English as though English were a Jewish language. What I mean by that is not that I include a bunch of words in italics or something like that, but rather that the language of the text itself makes these references to Jewish historic and religious texts.
In addition to writing, teaching, I know you have 4 young children.
Yes.
How old are they?
8, 6, 4, and 1.
So how do you manage?
I invented an app that dilates time, right? And if you buy my book, I'll give you one.
That's right. Before we end, I just wonder if you might share some advice that you might have for young writers.
Wow. I would say, the most honest advice is to keep writing. I mean, there's every reason to be discouraged, and there always was, and there always will be every reason to be discouraged. And my advice to young writers is to just, get your work out there in any possible way you can. And then not just to get your work out there in any possible way you can, but to write and work on your own projects every day, even before anyone's reading them, even before you know whether they're going to go anywhere, because it's those years of building up the ideas that ultimately give you sort of the fuel to embark on a larger project, or a project that's all your own.
So thanks. It's always a great honor, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.